So this is a big one, and wow, where do we begin? Basically, the leak included a roadmap from Microsoft where they intend to achieve market leadership in gaming by 2030. One of the reasons, or rather one of the things that are going to be doing in order to achieve this, they're fully invested into Gen 10. There will be a 10th generation console. There won't be an enhanced version of Gen 9. We know that now. And we've got some initial details of their vision. In fact, I'm going to read out what their vision is for the new console as it is presented in this document. It's to develop a next-generation hybrid game platform capable of leveraging the combined power of the client and cloud to deliver deeper immersion and entirely new classes of game experiences. Optimized for real-time gameplay and creators, we will enable new levels of performance beyond the capabilities of the client hardware alone. And then underneath that, they have got their key strategic decisions and investments. Very thin on the ground in terms of details. Oliver, thoughts on this? What do you think of the vision, first of all?
Well, the vision, I have to say, I'm not a fan of the vision.
We've heard it all before.
We've heard it all before, and I don't think that the cloud is a new idea in gaming. And I think even in the cases where we've seen like a really meaningfully cloud-centric platform like the Stadia, there were a few interesting concepts, like with interaction with like live streamers and things like this that look sort of interesting.
Yeah.
But we never saw them, and they kind of looked like gimmicks, like you'd try it once or twice. It wouldn't really meaningfully change the experience. So in terms of the actual concept, and I know the cloud is such a huge thing that people are pushing now, I don't see the value add. I don't see it. I look through this. I don't see the value add of a really cloud-centric pitch, especially if it's being combined still with client hardware that's going to be in the user's home, which from this document I would suggest is true. In terms of the actual silicon, some of the things they suggest are more interesting. On the CPU side, they suggest a choice between a next-gen ARM processor and Zen 6, which is, probably at least a few years from now. They mentioned the ARM choice needs to be made soon, so judging by this timeline, it would have already been made by this point as we're speaking now. And they want a big little design, which is something ARM has done for a long time, but I think AMD is doing one soon. I'm still a little bit, I don't understand it. Maybe I'm just wrong. I don't understand it. I don't really totally understand why they have such an emphasis on big little designs, because consoles are relatively power hungry and the CPU is a very small part of that. I mean, maybe they could just be used for the OS. But the other aspect of it that's a little bit more befuddling to me is the ARM choice. Right now, there aren't any ARM off-the-shelf processors that you could license from ARM or from Qualcomm that have a similar performance level to the desktop chips that we would see in most PCs. Apple makes very performant ARM cores, very large ARM cores, very complex ARM cores. No one else is. Now, maybe that changes in a few years, but even when you're looking at something like Zen 6, that's also going to be considerably improved from Zen 4. So I think that the x86 choice there would presumably be a more powerful option, and also could potentially have backwards compatibility. Now in this sheet, they don't mention backwards compatibility. They only mention forwards compatibility, so who knows? But I found that a little bit confusing. Like, why wouldn't you just stick with x86? I don't know.
Yeah. Obviously, there are tentative specs here, Alex. What are your thoughts on them?
So I just want to mention for the vision, I'm obviously skeptical of cloud junk as it was presented 10 years ago, but it's going to have been 15 years since then by the time this thing comes out. And the rapid progress of AI with cloud-based decision-making and cloud things. They mentioned in a later sheet a bunch of the goals. Next gen gaming powered by AI and ML, little sheet there with like 5 columns on it. And those things that they mentioned there are actually a bit more, I can feel them a bit more as seeing like why they would be useful. NLP dialogue generation, there was the recent presentation about NVIDIA. Yeah. Yes, it's a bit ham-fisted, but the idea is literally, when I was just talking with Jakob Knapik and Brian Catanzaro, they both mentioned this, and Jakob said it, and he was a person who literally works on massive RPG games. And he's saying this is something very real. And I actually see that as a powerful benefit to a game, the ability to, we can't program every single thing that you're doing in the game and program reactions to it for side content, but we can have some of that side content be enriched through cloud-based interactions with AI. I feel that is actually pretty realistic and would be good. And a couple of these other things, I don't care about monetization improvement. I probably know what that's about. But like things like AI game testing and, AI agents, and I feel like that could be really powerfully, well-made things, presuming that they have content. These are real things that they can actually make content for to back them up. They're a bit pie in the sky right now because we haven't seen them so much in games yet, but it does seem like the trajectory, a lot of things are going to be going in 5 years for really big AAA games, and to make them easier to make and make them come out more often instead of every 6 to 7 years like we're going to see with Grand Theft Auto, whatever. So those things I think are positive. Regarding the hardware, I have no idea. This is so crazy. I can't speak so much so to the hardware like Oliver can, but when I did look at the graphics innovation slide as well as the graphics pillar in the last slide I was just talking about under game performance, the interesting thing about all those things there is it looks like NVIDIA technology from about 5 to 6 years ago, and also, but there's a couple newer ones there too. Because obviously they mentioned frame generation there under frame rate interpolation. And it's like, by the time this slide existed, the only person who was really serious about this and openly serious about it was NVIDIA, which is curious. Also, a lot of these other things here are things that NVIDIA has been just straight on top of since 2018 and only increased how on top of, how much they're investing in it since then. Next gen DirectX ray tracing. Yeah, we know that's NVIDIA's ball court. Dynamic global illumination. How many AMD sponsored games have dynamic global illumination? Micro polygon rendering optimizations is interesting because one, we see mesh shaders being brought about by Turing. It's part of the DirectX DirectX 12 Ultimate spec. Currently not used in a lot of titles at all. Micro polygon rendering, though, we've seen through compute with Nanite. Obviously, you can do similar things with mesh shading, but there's another interesting technology brought about with Ada Lovelace hardware called DMM, which is displaced micromeshes is what they're called. And it's essentially a new format for doing smaller than triangle pixels in both ray tracing and rasterization. And it hasn't been picked up in anything yet, obviously. I don't think it's been used in any game. It might be used in Omniverse. It might be used for offline rendering. But seeing these things that all sound like NVIDIA technologies being brought up on this Xbox sheet are just like so curious to me. Like we don't have any, like there's like almost zero visibility, ML-based super resolution. We know that AMD has nothing there at the moment. And when people talk about it, they're very much so focused on the hand-tuned compute future that is open and useful for everyone and every hardware, etc. So a lot of these things here are just not AMD's ball court. And it's really curious to see them on this slide. I mean, it's 5 years in the future, I guess now. So who knows what AMD could maybe be doing then? But it would be like there's someone who's been doing these things and has this infrastructure all built up already and all their resources, and they already have the brain trust, and that's NVIDIA. And to see them show up, those technologies show up in this slide is just like, what's going on here? I don't know, Rich. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, there's an interesting divergence here in that they're talking about an NPU, which sounds like a sort of more of an Apple-like design where you have an AI block on the SoC that's separate from the GPU. That's right, isn't it, Oliver?
Yeah, like a neural processing unit, I think is probably the acronym there.
Yeah. Whereas NVIDIA's approach is essentially to embed the AI cores within the whole GPU, right? It's completely integrated. I suspect that would probably have advantages there. I don't know. In terms of the overall vision here, when you start talking about cohesive hybrid compute, I just can't help but think of the Starfield launch, where we had basically massive concurrency of people playing the game simultaneously. I think it was like up to 1 million users at one point. Maybe I'm wrong there. Certainly it was in the early access period, it was at least 200,000 people on Steam, I think, alone playing Starfield. How can you produce a hybrid compute game if you've got 200,000 people simultaneously hammering your cloud service? right? This is a logistical challenge that I don't see how you can overcome it, right? We've also this whole concept of having the cloud more directly interface with the console. Microsoft has tried it already with Crackdown, and there's some footage from IGN which I'm sure we can put in, which kind of shows some really impressive destruction physics happening. Looks really, really good. But for whatever reason, it was going to be coming for the Xbox One generation, but it never did. Why? Maybe it's the fact that, all of those logistical challenges are just too high, but Microsoft seems to be doubling down on this. In terms of the silicon, it seems to be essentially a sort of grab bag of stuff from the AMD roadmap. I'm sure it'll be a really good console. Zen 6, 5th generation Navi. We're on 3rd now. If you assume new Navis every couple of years, that kind of takes us up to 2027. I'm sure it'll be fine. They certainly seem to be talking about the right things in terms of visual enhancements and the importance of ray tracing and machine learning. But you're right, Alex. I mean, when you look at the next generation gaming powered by AI and ML, those first two columns, certainly the first column, is what's happening in the PC space right now. Super resolution deep neural network, DLSS2. Frame rate interpolation, DLSS3 frame generation, xCloud latency compensation, reflex. It's all there now, right? And I think if you're planning a console for release in 2028, you need to be more radical. You need to be more at the cutting edge. And dare I say it, you've got to be talking to NVIDIA, because these are the guys at the forefront of all of this. It kind of... If they're going to stick with AMD and they're not going to say license DLSS or DLSS technologies, then essentially you're in lockstep with AMD, right? And AMD are years behind NVIDIA on this stuff at the moment, years behind. And I honestly think it makes sense for Microsoft to be thinking more about the overall Xbox ecosystem, where a lot of it is going to be PC based. It's happening now, and it'll be even more prevalent by then, where there's cutting edge stuff happening on the PC side that can't happen on console because we're locked in with hardware that was designed originally sort of 2016 to 2017, and that's kind of my concern about that. All of the stuff like AI agents, I guess that all comes from just utilization of the MPU block, which fair enough, but would AMD do DLSS ray reconstruction or a technology similar to that? It's kind of like they get sort of pushed kicking and screaming into feature parity with NVIDIA, and it arrives later and usually it's not as good. Is this really where you want your console to be? I would be realigning with PC. That would be, if I was sort of had a vision for the future of a console. It's ironic, isn't it, Alex? Because if we go back to the past, it was the consoles that had the kind of exotic and bespoke features, and right. PC was kind of more homogenized. These days, it's the other way around. All of the cutting edge stuff, the custom hardware, it's all happening on PC, and it's happening on PC years ahead of consoles. It's quite fascinating to see that.
It's interesting. I also think just like, if you wanted to differentiate yourself from the competition at this point, staying with AMD for the GPU design, and I don't know, the CPU is a whole other question, but for the GPU design, because you have to stick there because you want the SoC, you want those power and manufacturing savings there. You don't want to do like the original Xbox, separate GPU, separate CPU at that point in time. That's why you're doing it. But at the same time, this grab bag that you talked about, Rich, of things coming presumably from far down the pipeline from AMD, who's also going to have that exact same grab bag of stuff?
Absolutely.
It's Sony's, and you're going to get the situation where they already have the market share anyway, and they're going to be designing very similar things from the exact same manufacturer. Like, you're just putting out like a slightly different box than what they're doing if you're using the exact same tech, and it's pretty boring, and it's not exciting. I don't know, Oliver. What do you think?
So I just wanted to follow up on a couple things first. The silicon totally is like, you look at this roadmap and it does totally look like just what NVIDIA was doing 4 or 5 years ago. It's kind of remarkable in that respect. It's not very future looking, like it's all stuff you could have written on the back of a notepad before the current gen consoles launched. It's not really showing any, I think, leadership in that space. That's a concern to me. I totally agree with you, Alex, on the AI and ML stuff, how important that will be for future games. Obviously, I'm a big believer in that. Running it through the cloud is a very good idea, because then you don't have to spare extra memory on it. Even if it could run on the NPU, running a big LLM in memory on a console, I don't think that's going to happen when you're running a game as well. So there are lots of good reasons to do it. I was more just thinking in terms of the overall cloud, like various cloud concepts. That's not interesting, but AI for sure I'm very interested in. In terms of the console discussion, if I was to sketch out a next-gen console that would be really, really exciting to me, right? Something that would actually really, really excite me, I would love to see a next-gen console, a full-on NVIDIA partnership, possibly with backwards compatibility only provided through a cloud service, which I think Microsoft would be in a good position to deliver at that point, actually. And potentially they're not even going to ship backwards compatibility, judging from their sheet anyways. So I'd love to see what a console maker could do with a fast NVIDIA GPU at 200 watts, recent NVIDIA tech. And I think the future is probably defined a lot more by having really good AI inference hardware, having great ray tracing. I think that's probably going to be a very key part of next generation technologies for gaming. And frankly, even if an AMD catches up, I think NVIDIA is still going to have like a 4 or 5 year head start on them in all these technologies, and they're going to be further ahead of the curve, right? That's my concern.
Yeah,
it's interesting, right? Because the roadmap says to me that we're going to produce a box that Sony could produce again.
Yeah.
And that's just not really going to shift the needle. Meanwhile, there is this big strategy to align closer to PC. And, the reality is NVIDIA has like 80% market share in the GPU market, and they're basically defining they're defining the future of PC graphics at the moment. Alan Wake and Cyberpunk coming out, they're going to be massively transformed compared to the sort of standard versions that you would play on consoles. And I think that's something that they've got to buy into. There's also going to be the fact that, Switch 2 will be on NVIDIA as well. So, how do you differentiate against Sony? How do you more closely align with the best of the best in PC, which is crucial to the future of the Xbox platform? And the answer is to be much more radical in the design of your console. And in terms of whether, the experiences that we're seeing with DLSS 3.5, it's interesting that, NVIDIA continues to market using 4090, which I can see why they're doing it, because you get the best visual results and the best performance numbers on those big frame rate graphs that appear. But, this stuff is eminently scalable. It does work on smaller slabs of silicon. My advice to Microsoft would be think radical, right? Think big. Think about how you can actually sort of get some sort of edge over Sony. And I just don't think another box, based on a similar principle to what happened with Series X is going to cut the mustard, right? Mm-hmm. Interestingly, though, there's an interesting question here from Fiddler_2K. If Microsoft ultimately takes the ARM64 route for their next generation platform rather than x86, what could this mean for backwards compatibility? And you've sort of positioned the notion that it could all be moved onto the cloud there, Oliver.
Yeah.
I don't think we can understate the capabilities of the compatibility team. They've already managed to get PowerPC titles running on an x86 processor.
Right.
Possibly there could be routes forward on that as well. Mm-hmm. And we've seen, obviously we've seen what Apple has done with Rosetta. That's it's really, really interesting stuff. So I don't think it completely rules out backwards compatibility. It does make it more challenging though, but I think Microsoft are kind of up to the task.
I think one question there too is just how fast are those individual ARM cores? Because if they are comparably fast or significantly faster than Zen 2, I imagine they could do it. But right now you look at the ARM landscape and they're like, 2/3 the IPC of Apple cores. They're not really in the same ballpark as Zen 2 at the moment. So I think they need to be comparably fast at least. That's my concern. But maybe they'll get there. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an both of those points are really awesome. And I was just thinking, maybe actually does align with them still having backwards compatibility, even if they're ARM64, because as far as I understand it, the reason why Microsoft can do its what is that name of that thing where you can like minimize the game, turn off the Xbox, and bring it back up, and you can do it for multiple games.
Quick resume.
What's it called? Quick resume. From what I understand, the reason why quick resume exists and you can do this with multiple games at the same time is because each game exists in like a virtual machine of like a console, like itself. And so you can just bring up these games of any, Power PC or the original, Xbox 360 or the original Xbox, and it can just run them flat out without any issues. And I think that's part of the design, is to be slightly more abstracted from Sony than the hardware is. And that gives them that little edge to do those weird things, those smart resume or whatever it's called. So maybe that can play into it a little bit too, to allow something like backwards compatibility. But like Oliver said, though, there's got to be the performance there to make it worthwhile. Or maybe I saw someone suggest in a comment somewhere, it was interesting, the next Xbox can only do backwards compatibility for Series S. And I thought that was funny. The idea that you'd have like 720p games in 2028.
Okay. Yeah, interesting discussion there. And I think one thing to bear in mind is that for the last generation, actually for Xbox One, there was this thing called the Fortaleza leak, which was, again, a very similar roadmap to what was going to happen for the Xbox consoles for Xbox One. And again, it was concept driven. They were talking about ARM cores in there as well. It never really happened. It never came to pass. So I think a lot of this is going to be discussion points. I think for me, the one thing that sort of stands out is that there are things here that I can expect to happen that I think are good moves. Right? Obviously, they've got to make a big play on machine learning. But from a gaming perspective, from a gamer's perspective, I'm not seeing a vision here that excites me. That's the thing. I guess that comes further along. Maybe there's different personnel involved. Maybe I don't know. But I don't look at this hardware and think, wow, this is amazing. This is phenomenal. It looks like a catch-up machine for what's happening in the PC space, when I honestly think Microsoft needs to be at the forefront